Hey there, deep divers. So today we're going to be diving deep into the world of self-sabotage. And I was thinking about this getting ready for this deep dive, and I think
Mm,
this is something that so many people struggle with, even people who seem to have it all together.
yeah,
They seem to have all the success in the world, but they still find ways to kind of trip themselves up.
right.
So we're using Brianna Wiest's book, The Mountain Is You, as our source material today to really unpack this. So
Yeah.
one of the things that really struck me at the beginning of the book was this idea that self-sabotage isn't about self-hatred or like a lack of willpower.
Mm.
It's almost like it's about these deep-seated needs and the subconscious desire to protect ourselves, even if it means holding ourselves back.
It's so interesting how she frames that,
Right.
right? Like it's not a lack of willpower, it's a misdirection of it.
Oh, that's good.
We're really good at getting our needs met sometimes. It's just
Yeah.
not in the way that actually serves us.
And the book uses this really interesting story about Carl Jung to illustrate this point.
Okay.
So,
The famous psychologist.
do you remember that story?
Yeah. So when he was a kid, he was struggling in school. And one day he had this fall and he had this thought like, well, maybe now I won't have to go back.
Wow.
And then he started having these fainting spells.
It's like his mind created a solution,
Right.
even if it wasn't a healthy one.
A substitute for legitimate suffering.
Yeah, and so Wiest really talks about this idea that we all have these unmet needs, and these are driving a lot of our behaviors, even the self-sabotaging ones. So let's talk about some of those needs that she highlights in the book, things like the need for validation or the need for security or even the need for control.
Those are all very human needs, right?
They're not bad in themselves. It's how we go about trying to meet them.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And when we're not meeting them in a healthy way, that's where the self-sabotage can come in.
Like clinging to a relationship that's not good for us or procrastinating on that big project.
Or staying in a job that's soul-crushing.
Right, because it feels safer than risking failure or rejection.
It's so much about fear, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The book talks about the fear of vulnerability, the fear of failure, and even the fear of success.
The fear of success. That's a really interesting one.
It is interesting because I think we all kind of intellectually get why that might be a thing, but it still feels counterintuitive.
Right. It's like if I actually
Yeah.
achieve that thing, then what does my whole life change?
Right.
Do I have to become someone different?
Right. Or do I even deserve it?
Exactly.
And that kind of ties into this whole concept of the upper limit, which she talks about, which
Yeah.
is basically this idea that we all have this sort of tolerance for happiness. And when we start to exceed that limit, our subconscious kicks in to kind of bring us back down.
To what feels familiar,
Yeah.
even if it's not actually good for us.
It's so crazy.
Yeah, like a thermostat.
Yeah.
You know, set at a certain level of comfort. And if we get too far away from that,
It's like, whoa, this is too good to be true. I got to
gotta bring it back down.
mess this up somehow.
Have you ever noticed that in your own life?
Oh, absolutely. Like you're
Yeah.
on a roll, things are going great, and then suddenly you make this decision or this choice that seems completely out of character.
Yeah. Or something happens that seems to
Yeah.
come out of left field and knocks you off course.
So it's not just about recognizing those self-sabotaging behaviors, it's also about understanding those underlying needs,
Mm-hmm.
the fears that might be driving them. And that's really the key to breaking free, right?
Yeah. It's not about beating yourself up for those behaviors, but seeing them as valuable data.
Oh, that's good.
It's like, what is this trying to tell me?
Right. What is this behavior trying to tell me about what I need or what I'm afraid of?
Yeah,
And then we can start to figure out how to meet those needs in a healthier way.
exactly.
So the book offers a ton of strategies for doing just that. And I know our listeners are all about actionable advice. So I'm excited to dig into some of those.
Me too. It's one thing to have these aha moments, but then how do we actually create lasting change?
That's the million-dollar question. So one of the things that really stuck out to me was this idea of microshifts. It's such a simple concept, but it seems so powerful.
Yeah, I love that concept. It's the idea that small, consistent actions can lead to massive change over time.
It reminds me of that saying, Rome wasn't built in a day. It's like building those positive habits brick by brick.
Exactly. It's not about trying to overhaul your entire life overnight, but making those small, deliberate choices
A day at a time.
day after day.
Yeah, and that ties into another really interesting idea that she talks about, which is this concept of the anti-fragility of our brains.
Oh, yeah. Have you ever heard of that term before?
I have, but I have to admit, I'm not sure I fully grasp it.
It's so fascinating. Basically, it means that challenges and adversity, while uncomfortable, can actually make us stronger and more creative in the long run.
So it's like weightlifting.
Huh?
You tear those muscle fibers so they can grow back stronger.
Exactly. Our brains are kind of the same way. They can adapt and grow from challenges.
Even the challenges that we might create for ourselves through self-sabotage.
Right. It's not about avoiding challenges altogether, but about approaching them with a different mindset.
So it's that whole growth mindset idea,
Yeah.
embracing the challenges as opportunities for learning.
And building resilience.
And she gives some really practical tips for building mental strength.
Yeah, like planning ahead, practicing humility,
Yeah.
asking for help when you need it.
Which I think is so important. Taking responsibility for the outcomes in our lives, both the positive and the negative ones.
Owning our choices.
Yeah.
Recognizing we have a power to shape our own destiny.
And that's what this is all about, right?
Absolutely.
It's about empowerment. It's about recognizing that we have the power to make different choices, even when it's hard.
And even when we're afraid.
And another thing that she talks about is this idea of the impact of past trauma. And I think that's something that a lot of people carry with them sometimes without even realizing it.
Yeah, trauma can show up in so many ways.
So the book talks about the importance of things like reinstating a sense of safety and learning to physically calm the body's stress response.
It's interesting because we often think of trauma as this purely mental or emotional experience. But it's actually stored in our bodies, too.
So practices like meditation or deep breathing or even just physical movement can be really powerful tools for healing.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
all about that mind-body connection.
Right. And that ties into the concept of emotional intelligence, which she really emphasizes as
Yeah.
being key to overcoming self-sabotage.
Emotional intelligence allows us to understand ourselves better and to respond to our needs in a healthier way.
It's like learning to speak the language of our emotions so we can understand what they're trying to tell us.
And then we can choose how we want to respond instead of just reacting.
She talks about recognizing those patterns like anger, sadness, fear, and learning to process them constructively instead of letting them dictate our actions.
It's so powerful.
And then she talks about this idea of disconnecting our actions from our feelings.
Ooh, that's a tricky one.
That sounds hard. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so it's this idea that we can take action even when we don't feel like it.
Even when our emotions are telling us to stay in bed or eat the whole pint of ice cream.
Exactly. And often the act of taking action can actually shift our emotions in a more positive direction.
So it's not about ignoring or suppressing our feelings. They're still there. They're giving us information, but it's about not letting them control us.
Right. It's about making choices that are in our best interest, even when our emotions are pulling us in a different direction.
And that's where the power of principles comes in.
Yes.
Which I know is something that our listeners are really drawn to.
Absolutely.
It's about having those guiding values that help us make decisions and overcome self-sabotage.
It's like having that inner compass
Right.
that keeps us on track even when our emotions are trying to steer us off course.
And she talks about establishing strong money principles like living below your means or getting out of debt.
Yes. Those are such important foundations.
Saving for the future.
It's about taking control of your finances instead of letting your finances control you.
Right. And then this is where things got really interesting for me. She talks about this concept of connecting with your highest potential future self.
Okay, now this is where it gets exciting.
It's like this idea of tapping into this wiser future version of yourself and using their wisdom to guide your present actions.
It's like having a mentor from the future.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued by this. So in the next part of our deep dive, let's talk more about how to actually do that. How do we tap into that wisdom?
I'm happy to share more about that. It's a really powerful practice.
Awesome.
That can be truly transformative.
Well, we'll be right back after a quick break. Okay, so we're back, and we're talking about connecting with our highest potential future selves. And I have to say, I'm still a little bit skeptical, but I'm willing to give it a try. So how do we actually do that?
It's a process.
Yeah.
And like anything else, it takes practice. The first step is really getting clear on who that future self is. What are they like? What are their values? What have they achieved?
So it's not just about like wishing for a better future. It's about actually creating a vision in our minds.
Exactly. You want to be able to see them, feel their energy. Imagine a typical day in their life.
Okay, so I have this picture in my mind. Now what? Do I just like stare at it?
Not quite.
Yeah.
The next step is to observe them in action. What are they doing? How are they spending their time? How do they interact with others?
So it's almost like shadowing them for a day.
Yeah. See how they move through the world? Notice their habits, their priorities, their mindset.
I'm already starting to notice things about my future self that I really admire, like their confidence and the way they handle challenges.
And that's the beauty of this practice. It allows you to tap into qualities and strengths that you may not even realize you possess.
So it's not just about like copying their every move. It's about extracting the essence of who they are and what they represent.
Exactly. What are the values that are driving their choices? What are the principles that they're living by?
So if my future self is really organized and efficient,
Yeah.
maybe I start by setting some small goals to get better at time management.
Right? Or if they're really confident and outgoing, maybe you push yourself to be a little bit more social.
Yeah, step outside my comfort zone a bit.
Hmm.
And as we start to do these things, it's like we're aligning ourselves with that vision of our best selves.
And you might be surprised at how things start to shift in your life. Opportunities might come up. Relationships might change.
It's like we're creating a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly. You're tapping into the energy of your highest potential.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about some specific self-sabotaging behaviors. The book has so many great examples, and I know our listeners love real-world applications.
Sounds good. Where should we start?
Well, I've definitely been guilty of this one, going back to the same person who broke your heart, even though you know it's not good for you.
Ooh, that's a tough one.
It is tough. Why do we do that?
Well, Wiest suggests that it might be time to take a look at your childhood relationships.
Okay, but what does that have to do with my romantic choices as an adult?
More than we might realize. She says that if you find something comforting or appealing about someone who hurts you, there's usually a deeper reason rooted in those early experiences.
So it's like we're trying to recreate those dynamics, hoping for a different outcome.
But often ending up with the same heartbreak.
And speaking of relationships, another common pattern is attracting partners who are emotionally unavailable.
Yeah. Why do we do that to ourselves?
Right. It's like we're setting ourselves up for failure.
Well, Wiest has a really interesting perspective on this. She says it's often a sign that we don't believe we're worthy of being fully loved and committed to.
Ouch. That one stings a little bit.
It's tough to hear, but it makes sense. If you don't believe you deserve love, you're going to subconsciously choose partners who reinforce that belief.
So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly. You attract what you believe you deserve.
Okay, so then how do we break free from that pattern?
It starts with recognizing your own worthiness, recognizing that you are inherently deserving of love and commitment, regardless of your past experiences.
I love that. Okay, let's talk about another pattern that I think a lot of people can relate to, feeling unhappy even when you've achieved everything you thought you wanted in life.
Yeah, it's like the classic, I got everything I ever wanted, but I'm still not happy scenario.
Why is that?
Well, Wiest suggests that it might be a sign that you're relying on those external achievements to validate your worth rather than cultivating a sense of inner peace and fulfillment.
So it's not about the stuff, it's about the state of mind.
Exactly. True happiness comes from within, not from external circumstances.
And speaking of inner work, let's talk about some of those everyday self-sabotaging behaviors. Things like poor eating habits, procrastination, surrounding ourselves with the wrong people.
These are the little things that we often dismiss as no big deal, but they can really add up over time.
So let's start with emotional eating. You know, reaching for that bag of chips or that pint of ice cream when you're stressed or bored.
It's a classic way to numb out those uncomfortable emotions.
But what's the message behind the munchies?
Wiest offers a couple of possible explanations. One is that you're simply doing too much and not giving yourself enough rest and nourishment.
So our body's rebelling against our overscheduled lives.
Exactly. And the other explanation is that you're emotionally hungry. You're craving something deeper. Connection, purpose, fulfillment.
And we're trying to fill that void with food.
It's a temporary fix, but it doesn't address the underlying need.
Okay, let's tackle another big one, procrastination. We all do it, but for some of us, it's a chronic pattern that keeps us from reaching our full potential.
Procrastination is sneaky. It often hides behind busyness or perfectionism.
Yeah, I'm definitely guilty of that one.
But Wiest's take on this is that you might not be as clear on your goals as you think you are.
So if I'm constantly procrastinating on something, it might be a sign that it's not the right path for me.
It's like our subconscious is saying, hey, this isn't it. Let's find something that truly lights you up.
And speaking of finding the right path, let's talk about the people we surround ourselves with. Our friends, our colleagues, our family members.
Yes, the people we spend our time with have a huge impact on our energy, our mindset, our overall well-being.
It's so true. But why do we sometimes gravitate towards those toxic connections? The energy vampires who leave us feeling drained.
Wiest's insight here is that we might be seeking validation or a sense of belonging in the wrong places.
So instead of seeking approval from others, we need to start by approving of ourselves.
Exactly. Recognize your own worth and value regardless of what others might think or say.
And speaking of what others think, Let's talk about that pesky inner critic, the voice in our head that's always telling us we're not good enough.
Oh, the inner critic can be so relentless.
It can, and it really holds us back.
Wiest suggests that it's a sign that we're not truly happy with our own lives.
So we're looking for others to fill a void that only we can fill.
Exactly. And the key to silencing that inner critic is to start focusing on what truly matters to you, not what you think others expect of you.
And another area where this plays out is in our finances. I'm talking about overspending, impulse purchases that promise to make us feel better but just end up making us feel guilty and broke.
Ah, the allure of retail therapy.
What's the message behind the money drain? What are we trying to buy?
Wiest's insight here is that we might be trying to purchase a new life or identity. We're trying to buy our way into a sense of security or status or belonging.
So it's not about the stuff itself. It's about what we think the stuff will bring us.
Exactly. And it's all about recognizing those emotional triggers and finding healthier ways to cope.
Okay, one more pattern I want to talk about. Those friendships that feel more like a competition than a true connection.
Oh, yeah. The frenemies who are always one-upping you or subtly putting you down.
Why do we choose these kinds of relationships?
It's a really good question. And Wiest's take on it is that we're actually craving connection, but we're going about it in a really unhealthy way.
So we're trying to gain a sense of worthiness by proving ourselves to be better than others?
It's a misguided attempt to feel valued and important. But as we've been discussing, true self-worth comes from within.
And when we recognize that we can start to build friendships based on genuine connection and mutual support.
Surround yourself with people who celebrate your successes and lift you up.
Wow, expert speaker, we've covered so much ground today. This book is a treasure trove of insights.
It really is.
And I think this idea of connecting with our highest potential future selves is really powerful.
I agree. It's a game changer.
So in the final part of our deep dive, let's explore that concept in more detail. How do we actually tap into that wisdom and use it to guide our present actions?
I'm happy to share more about that. It's practice that can truly transform your life.
Awesome. Well, we'll be right back. All right, so we're back. And I'm really excited to explore this concept of connecting with our highest potential future selves. I have to admit, I'm still a little bit skeptical, but I'm also really intrigued by the possibilities. So let's dive in. How do we actually make that connection?
It's all about bridging the gap between where we are now and where we want to be. And the first step is visualization.
Okay, so we've already talked about creating a vivid picture of our future self in our minds.
Right. But it goes beyond just a static image. It's about stepping into their shoes, experiencing their life from their perspective.
So it's not just about creating a vision board, it's about actually embodying that future self.
Exactly. Imagine a typical day in their life. What are their morning rituals? What kind of work are they doing? Who are they spending their time with? What are their passions and priorities?
I'm starting to see how this could be really powerful. I mean, just imagining myself in that future state already makes me feel more confident and empowered.
And that's the key. You're tapping into the energy of that future self and bringing it into the present moment.
So as we spend time with this future self, what else should we be paying attention to?
Notice their qualities and strengths. Observe how they handle challenges, how they interact with others. What kind of energy do they radiate?
I'm noticing that my future self is really calm and collected, even in the face of adversity.
And that calmness is already within you.
Mm.
You just have to cultivate it and give it space to grow.
So it's not about becoming a completely different person. It's about tapping into those aspects of ourselves that are already there.
Exactly. It's about unlocking your full potential.
Okay, so I've spent some time visualizing my future self. Now what?
Now it's time to ask for their guidance. Imagine having a conversation with them. What advice would they give you about the challenges you're facing now?
Wow, I never thought about it that way. It's like having a personal mentor who knows me better than anyone else because they are me.
And they have the benefit of hindsight. They've already navigated the path that you're on.
So I could ask them things like, how did you overcome this obstacle? Or what's the most important lesson you've learned?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as you engage in this practice, you might be surprised at how your present-day choices start to align with that vision.
It's like we're creating a self-fulfilling prophecy.
You're tapping into the wisdom of your future self and using it to guide your present actions.
This is incredible. I'm starting to feel a real shift in my perspective.
That's the power of this practice. It allows you to see yourself and your potential in a whole new light.
So instead of fearing our self-sabotaging behaviors, we can start to see them as opportunities for growth.
Absolutely. They're valuable signals pointing us towards those areas where we need to heal and evolve.
And by connecting with our highest potential future selves, we can tap into the wisdom and resilience we need to overcome those challenges and create a life that's truly aligned with our purpose.
It's a journey of self-discovery and transformation.
Well, expert speaker, this has been an incredibly insightful deep dive. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, self-mastery is not a destination. It's a journey. It's about showing up for yourself every day, making choices that support your growth, and becoming your own best advocate.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope you've gained some valuable insights and tools to help you navigate the challenges of self-sabotage and create a life that's truly fulfilling. Until next time, keep diving deep and keep learning.